And thank you all for being here. It's a busy, crazy week. I think Tony already had one event today, and I'm sure you have one by the end of the day. So thanks for the intro, but Tony doesn't really need much of an intro because he's been one of the most visible agents of change in the last several years, certainly as the CMO of Subway, but also as the chairman of the ANA, and the visibility's gotten even, or maybe I should say viewability, has gotten more high recently because of certain events that we'll probably get into. But what you may not realize that he has a long career in marketing that transcends Subway and the ANA, and it goes for some of the most iconic brands in the world, Coca-Cola, Capital One, KFC, to name a few, at some of the most premium agency brands in the world, Young & Rubicon and McCann Erickson. And then earlier this year, he formed Cerebral Graffiti, a marketing consultancy. So maybe we'll hear a little bit about the positioning on that. I love the name of it. It's a New York-based company?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And most importantly, in his accolades, is he was inducted into the OMA All-Stars in 2012. I know that's really important.
So I appreciated that.
We did too. So basically, we only recognize people who were making a difference in the industry. So you did that for sure. So there's so much ground we can cover. We only have an hour, and try and make it a little relevant to the video market because that's why we're here. But there's so many issues that affect the entire digital supply chain. So I know that's something that's on your mind. Maybe it would be great to start off and just tick off what are the major issues, and if there's any way you could prioritize.
So this will probably sound pretty simple and straightforward, but I think I speak for my colleagues on the board of the ANA and for the marketers that I interact with. We're looking for a heck of a lot more simplification, and we're also looking for outcomes that actually are provable, right? So there's all sorts of discussion about, what works, what doesn't work. With all due respect to the IAB, they set a standard up that was, 1 second is viewable. Sorry, I'm a smiling skeptic about that, okay? I'm not buying that that's going to impact my business and my brand, and I think that's a pretty, that kind of comment is agreed to by most folks. And I think what you have going on right now, if you kind of look from a macroeconomic perspective, sorts of information accessible, whether you're home or more importantly, whether you're traveling about and you can look at it on your whatever device you prefer. The problem with that is then you have all sorts of capital flows that people are trying to take advantage of, both to build companies and also to potentially enrich themselves. And at the end of the day, most of those business plans, when people say, well, how is this going to turn a profit, or how is this going to drive value for the initial investors or the first tranche investors or the angels investors or whoever else, it's this wonderful godsend called advertising, which is going to solve all our problems, and we're going to get a lot of that. And that's all well and good, but then you dig down a little deeper, and it's like, well, how do we get lots of advertising dollars? Well, we have to have rooms in, because everybody says, well, then rudimentary thing, people talk cost per thousand. So if I want to get ad dollars, I have to show a low cost per thousand. Well, to show a low cost per thousand, I have to have lots of people supposedly viewing my content in some way, shape, or form. Well, I think there's been an awful lot of effort to try to make sure those numbers are as bulky as possible. And I would go back to, the old days of publishing. When I was a kid, I actually entered all the bills in the system for Hearst one summer. So I knew the 1.5% discount if you paid within 15 days and all that stuff. But if you talk to the circulation guys back then about how circulation worked, they would say to you, well, if you really want to know how good a publication is, don't look at the subscription number, look at the newsstand number, because the newsstand number means somebody actually plucked down a couple bucks for that publication, and they're more likely to spend time with it. If I'm a circ guy, I can pump up that number by just basically giving the product away, and that doesn't necessarily mean those copies get read. But even in those days, if you were an advertiser, usually, maybe not every issue, but often there was a starch report saying which ads are most read, how many people saw it, and your brand was the 5th most read. All of that stuff is not really made the jump to the digital space. And because of that, lots of people have said, well, there's all this money floating around. I've got to make sure my entity gets my share of it. And for me to do that, I have to build in some things that protect me, and perhaps don't allow everybody to know all the stuff that I know about what's happening here. Those are not necessarily comfortable conversations because you have lots of businesses that are relying on people buying something where they don't necessarily have complete information. And that becomes a very, very messy circumstance, right? One of the conversations we've been having for a long time is when you look at the digital media supply chain, who the hell would have ever constructed this thing this way if they wanted it to make sense and to have longevity? You got all these things that are in the middle that are left turns down side alleys that aren't necessarily going to get you anywhere. And if you actually had the content creators, the marketers who are paying for the content, and the consumers or businesses who are consuming the content sitting at a table, and you gave them an a la carte list of, is this cookie worth that amount of dollars, and more importantly, that amount of download time, I think you would have a lot fewer there, and the presumption behind it is bigger data is better than less data. Data is a good thing, but not every piece of data is worth the incremental money or download time that is taking in the supply chain, right? And everybody wants to say, well, whose fault is that? Well, kind of it's everybody's fault because you let this digital supply chain grow, frankly, without any blueprint. I mean, who builds a house without having architectural plans?
Right, but it's not like there was a sentient being, designing this. This just happened.
It just occurred, right? So this perhaps sounds more pejorative than I intended to be, but it's kind of like this giant Rube Goldberg device that you keep taping on new things, and you say, well, wait a second, why don't you just knock down that wing of the house and build it so that it makes sense? And that has created, I think, significant problems because marketers probably weren't paying enough specific attention to some of these changes. But as they now have seen what's going on, they have a higher degree of skepticism about what's going on, and skepticism creates hesitation. And I don't think any market benefits from somebody being very hesitant about getting in because they're not sure if this or that or other organization's data is any good about what's really happening there. Now, do I care if somebody watches for 1, 3, 7, or 10 seconds? I only care that they get the message, right? And at the end of the day, all of those other standards are like, well, yeah, you're making the standard low so that your constituents can feel comfortable that they can add that to their audience. Is that legit? I don't think so.
Well, maybe that's a good opportunity for a follow-up because you talked about time a couple of times that maybe the 1 second minimum viable wasn't good enough, that there's no right norm of 6 or 7 seconds. We know GRPs and CPMs are the wrong model. It came out of an era of scarcity, and now we have ubiquity. So it sounds like you think we need a new metric altogether. What should it be if not time?
I don't know that I'm going to put one forward today. I think in some of the conversations I've had with folks, everybody's fearful of if you really validate the audience, therefore the CPM is going to go up, therefore I'm not going to look good, therefore I'm not going to get dollars. So this is not a completely formed thought at this point, but I think there needs to be some sort of transition period on that. Some of my really great media colleagues at McCann back in the day put together what in hindsight seems pretty simple, but we did days in the life for various consumer groups. And it's clear that not all media was valued the same by consumers. I think the same thing is the case today. We probably don't, there have been studies, but I'm not sure that there has been a kind of an independent study on that front. And frankly, one of the things that I'm sure we're going to be talking about with the ANA going forward is, just like we did an independent assessment of what's going on in the media place vis-a-vis agencies, we hired K2 Intelligence to do an assessment with the complete free rein to them of, you tell us what's happening. We just want the facts. I think in a somewhat different way, but perhaps similar too, we need the same thing going on in the media space now. Because, look, at the end of the day, if I'm, I know this because I know some folks who work on State Farm. State Farm just wants their logo to be recognized. That's good enough for them. When I was at Subway, I liked my logo, but I wanted a heck of a lot more than that. And, I sure think a delicious looking sandwich is better persuasion on a 60-inch flat screen than it is on a couple-inch mobile device.
Right, so no matter what your KPI is, you still need a universal metric to
Yes.
trade, right?
Yes.
So let's try and play that out. What should it be? It seems like you're teasing it up right now. I do think it is time. I mean, your old shop, Interpublic, just did a study where they showed on the MRC's minimal viable thing, they found occurrences where below 50% of the ad on screen had really high lifts. And the reason why was the amount of time it was in view. And in view could generate a lot of lift if it was on screen a long time. There's a lot of publishers moving to time spent metrics now.
So I would look at time spent, but remember, understanding video and being facile in video is not the same with all consumer groups, right? So, I'll use the personal example, but I think it's projectable. My wife and I have two pretty precocious 14-year-old twins, right? They can watch a video for 2 or 3 seconds and they'll tell you everything that they think is going to happen. I've got a pretty good visual eye. I'm not nowhere near as good as them. So everybody throws out the phrase digital natives. They're video natives, right? They would much rather view a video and presume what's going to happen than they'd like to read an article in a publication, right? So I don't, having an absolute standard, I think the standard has got to be adjustable based on your audiences.
Right, but you still need a common denominator,
You do,
right?
right.
What is the denominator?
Time spent is not a bad one, but again, let's go back to outcomes. I'd rather have the fact that my brand was identified and whatever message I had was communicated, right? Everybody wants to talk about when are dollars going to flow more from TV to video. They're going to flow when you get the outcome, right? So the conversation amongst a lot of my friends and colleagues in the space is, what are you doing this year? Are you putting more dollars in digital, or are you going back to TV? Well, I ran my media mix modeling, and for whatever reason, the numbers that I had gotten historically in digital are not as good anymore, for whatever reason, and I'm actually getting better return out of the more traditional media. That conversation's happened half a dozen times in the last 6 weeks with me, right? And I don't want to project that out and say that's a trend, because that's an incredibly small sample size. But that's with big brands that you guys would all be familiar with.
But brands have many tools in their arsenal to win consumer attention. One of them is buying media. The other is creating their own content and distributing it. But in order to create a marketplace, you need to have a common unit of exchange, regardless of what your KPI is. So I think you're saying that time is a pretty good way of doing that. You're still going to have different outcome measures for whatever your brand is. So let's move on to this other issue you alluded to, though, that maybe there needs to be some onus on the media supply chain the way we're looking at agencies. Can you elaborate a little bit and drill into that? Because that's interesting.
Well, so I've been kind of helping out the folks that made the announcement the other day about TrustX, which is the exchange for premium publishers. And they had really been investigating this for a long time, and they were looking for a little bit of help. And when I heard what they were doing, I was only too happy to get involved. The publishers, I think it's commonly accepted, but could be, proven otherwise if you do a study. If a marketer puts $1 into the digital media supply chain, the number that most people throw out there is 40 cents goes to the publisher, right? And there are all these other intermediaries there, and you're like, what the heck what is that money going to? And is there valid information that can be gleaned that can help you target? Yes. Is that being used well now? Probably not. Are there some things that are built in there that people would perhaps say they don't want if they had a chance to go point by point? And I think the answer to that is also yes. So if you looked at the list of publishers that got behind that in relatively short order, I remember sitting and I actually moderated a panel for them a while back where they were talking about becoming frenemies because they're all battling each other for dollars in the same space. But they were like, this is ridiculous. If we can't get together and show that our content and more importantly our audience is a cut above, then we're going to be priced the same as everybody else, and who wants to do that?
But as I understand it, that's Digital Content Next, the trade association, created TrustX to basically create an organizing principle for all the premium publishers to sell themselves to advertisers and agencies, right?
Right, but with with less intermediaries
Right,
and with the whole thing being much more transparent.
So their goal is to increase the price of their inventory to marketers by increasing the effectiveness and the ease of use and the lack of, increased simplicity, lack of complexity. So what difference does it make
Yeah,
for
but
you?
if you don't mind, John, let me just make a little kind of reference point. So I know that I did this when I had to make digital decisions, and I know that a lot of my colleagues do. Somebody comes in and says, "Isn't this great? I got a $1.26 CPM." Like, okay, that's a nonsense number. So how much bot fraud should I put in that? Well, that's 35%. And how much overstatement of numbers should I put in that? Well, that's this number of percent, right? So you go and even if you don't share it with anybody, you or your lead media person, in my case is my lead media person, we say, what do we think the real CPM is on this once you get done? And that $1 number quickly becomes a much higher number. And then the discussion happens like, okay, so that number is now getting into, cable TV space, right? In terms of what the CPM is. So yeah, so the cable TV ad load is too great. Basically if you're in an hour cable TV show from about the 24-minute mark to the 35-minute mark, you're running commercials, right? No, they'll never admit that, but that's essentially what's happening in a lot of spaces. So you're like, okay, which is a better environment for me to make sure my message gets through? And you test that stuff out, right? And you're making those decisions all the time. So nobody's out there saying, I bought this because it was $1.20 whatever CPM, because nobody thinks that's the right number. So even if it is a higher dollar received for the publisher, the fact of the matter is the value may be better once you go through those calculations.
Right. So my question is really, you're looking at the effective CPM, and what difference does it make to you as a brand whether you get the most effect by paying the premium publisher up front without any middlemen, or that you get the audience you want by paying some middlemen's taxes in effect? If you're still achieving the reach of the audience you want in the environment you want to reach that audience, what difference does it make where the effective CPM is?
But if as marketers, if we need to be stewards of this whole supply chain in a way, because it's an important way for us to drive businesses, and I've got consumers, they don't care what CPM I pay, but they care that it's going to be 10-second and some freaking download time, because there's cookie upon cookie there, and as they're watching all the different sites it goes through, they're like, where the heck is this information going? So, if you have the discussion about ad blocking, is ad blocking because consumers don't like advertising track? But I got to tell you want to get even premium kind of publisher. Now I happen to read the New York Times on my phone all the time, and I would consider them to be premium. And all of a sudden I'm sitting there for 10 seconds with all this other garbage that's being loaded in like a carnival barker from every different angle on my phone. I mean, it's nonsense.
Right, so the goal here is to clean it up and get rid of all the noise in the ecosystem. And premium publishers do that pretty well. But one last question, then maybe we can move on, which is, like viewability. You can buy 100% viewability, but you're going to pay for it.
Yes.
But isn't that just math? I mean,
to some degree it is. But I mean, let's go back for a second to your premium publishers can clean that up. They would say that. I would say that the experience that consumers have, probably because some of the premium publisher stuff is going through ad exchanges, right? Is not consistent with a definition that any consumer would prescribe as premium, which is why things like TrustX happen, right?
right. So, but from a consumer perspective, they may be reading content on the internet that's a personal blog or a crocheting site or something that's not one of the DCN branded publishers. That's quality content to them. Why is it any different? And you can't buy them direct. You have to buy them through exchanges and the long tail and other means.
There's nothing wrong with buying content that consumers are searching for. The question is it clear to the marketer what's going to be there, and are they going to get what they paid for, right? And at the end of the day, I think an awful lot of what has been paid for has not necessarily been delivered in the space.
Okay. Well, let's move on because we only have a
want to
limited...
talk about transparency?
Well, I do. That's where I'm going. I mean, we've been alluding to transparency here in essence, but we started with you saying maybe we need more focus on the supply chain.
Right.
But there's a different kind of supply chain for brands, which is their marketing services suppliers, their
Right.
agencies, and obviously a lot of focus in the last few months. You've been very vocal on it. Started with the K2 and Ubiquity report. Maybe go into where you see the
Before I came up here, I was fortunate to work in some terrific agencies with some really great media folks, you know, Young and Rubicam and McCann Erickson, and I worked alongside those media folks. As a matter of fact, at a relatively young age, I was the Associate Director of Marketing at Young and Rubicam. A big part of that job was new business, and I personally was responsible for the media section of many new business presentations. So I certainly have many colleagues and friends who I consider outstanding media people who add an awful lot to the value of the agency services that are provided to marketers. The reason the ANA had to do the independent assessment done by K2 Intelligence was there had been an ongoing conversation about what was really going on in the space. And essentially the disagreement was there's nothing going on, these are a few isolated circumstances, and you guys are off base with this thing. And that conversation goes back literally, I think it was 5 years ago now, is when that conversation was starting. Okay. And there was some back and forth. The ANA published a white paper. The ANA also commissioned a study by Reed Smith back in 2012. And the agencies continue to say there's nothing to this, okay? Then about a year and a half ago, John Mandel stood up at a media conference down in Florida and talked about all that was going on here, and it kind of started a fire burning brightly. In essence, what happened at that point in time was the agency said, this is just a disgruntled former media employee, and they try to position John in that fashion. Because we couldn't get agreement on that, we essentially said, you know what, we're going to hire an independent group to do an assessment and see what's really out there. And that led an RFP process with 30 plus organizations coming in and representation as to how they could bring this forward. And the ANA team selected K2 Intelligence, and to this day I would tell you that I personally believe that was a very inspired choice. Now some people would say, well, how could they do this? Well, they didn't really have any media knowledge. Well, that's why we paired them with Ubiquity Firm Decisions to kind of be the subject matter expert, right? And they were, meaning K2 Intelligence, was given, kind of free rein to interview whoever they wanted to, and to conduct this in a manner that made sense. They said to us that they needed to do this in an anonymous and confidential manner because a lot of people that they had sought out were really worried about the potential repercussions to them in their career. We said okay to that. Now, during this entire time, we were continuing to have conversations with the 4As about some potential principles going forward, but at the end of the day, we couldn't agree on the depth of those principles. There were some good things in there, no doubt, but there were some things that clearly we needed to go a little bit farther, so we weren't in agreement with that. K2 did their work, and actually I'd like to ask the question. So, of everybody in this room, how many people have actually read the K2 Intelligence report? Well, so being an old son of a teacher, I would recommend as your homework assignment, read the report, okay? It's a very thorough report. In our estimation, it's extremely objective. You've probably seen the headlines about it. The headlines certainly go in a couple different directions. But the report is, I know because I lived it, is as objective as you can possibly be. If there was anything we had a question about, we actually excluded it from the report, right? And there are a couple really fundamental findings. The first one is that there is, to use the word fundamental again, there's a fundamental disconnect between marketers and their agencies about how they're conducting business in the media space. So back when I was in the media agency, or in the agency world doing media stuff, there was no doubt that your first responsibility was to serve your client, and everything was done in the best interest of the client. That has kind of gotten away from us, right? People can say, why has that happened? I think you can talk about globalization in Australia or Brazil or some of the countries in Europe. It's very different than it is here. We would never operate that way. The second thing is there's been this kind of consolidation, and consolidation, probably leads to other decision making going forward. But I think it's fair to say that the number one responsibility of the media agencies now is to their holding company, and their holding company is a financial entity. So, at the core, if the way that somebody is doing business for a marketer is not understood, that's a pretty big chasm that needs to be solved. Now, the other thing that was unearthed in this assessment is that non-transparent behaviors are pervasive in the system, right? It's not one or two circumstances. And I certainly know, I think I know a reasonable amount about media, but I would say that everybody that I was aware of who was exposed to the report and the discussions probably learned something that they didn't know when they went through the entirety of the report. So that creates a circumstance where you got to get people back on the same page in terms of how things are being done. And, an agency implies that somebody is acting as your agent, and increasingly they're acting on their own behalf. As long as that's disclosed and discussed and agreed to, there's nothing wrong with that. But I'm not sure that those very candid conversations have happened as practices have moved in a different direction over the years.
Yeah, but they were always acting as your agent on your behalf, but they made their margins by buying media. And originally it was 15% directly derived. And over time, particularly procurement organizations, have changed the, remuneration model. So agency margins have squeezed and squeezed. So it makes sense that they would look to alternative margins. So,
okay.
So my question.
I won't argue that I would debate that, but I don't want to get into that debate.
But they should still be acting in your best interest. So my real question is what's changed? And some people point to when WPP acquired 24/7, and then it was the first time you saw a holding company that had a principal position in the media, and it's been a progression from there. Is that really what has changed? Is that the holding companies now own explicit operations that derive their revenue from arbitraging or taking a position in media?
I think that's part of it, but I would also say that as those organizations became increasingly global, we do this in this market, we do that in that market, why can't we do that in North America, right? I think that conversation happened an awful lot. And the question about taking ownership positions either in content or in companies that are going to be in this supply chain, those things ought to be disclosed, right? If somebody is taking a stake in a company that does measurement of digital stuff, and then they're building that into the digital package for their clients, that needs to be disclosed, in my estimation.
Apparently, we've shot through an hour already, but I want to leave some time for audience questions. So,
yeah, if there are any.
So can I just do one more thing before we jump to questions? So I really want to underscore the point that from an ANA perspective, the preferred outcome of this assessment would have been that there are a couple of instances of this, but there's not this kind of pervasive, non-transparent behavior. We really didn't want that. Frankly, it's not just up to any individual group to solve it. The whole group's got to solve it. My colleagues on the board, I think, would generally agree that they need to take a more participatory role in the media decisions because, frankly, that business basis, that fundamental disconnect is there, and they need to make sure they're part of it. Not in a heavy-handed way, but they need to make sure that they're representing the interest of their constituents as well as they possibly can.
Great, thanks. If there's any, question over here. Just a reminder, please stand, tell us your name and company when you do ask a question. There you are.
My name is Mike Donahue. I have a consultancy called Connect the Dots, and I just thought it might be a good idea. This is both Joe and Tony. I would urge everybody in this room. This is a question, and it's about something called the Client Bill of Rights. And Mr. Mandisi, the ubiquity, I would urge you to do that. I'd be curious to know, Tony, what you think about that. To me, when I saw that, it's like a one-page summary of the ubiquity. Not that you shouldn't read ubiquity, but Tony, what do you think about
So
that?
this was, last week we reported that media agency, MediaSmith from San Francisco, pulled out of the 4As, and they published a client bill of rights, which they're offering to the industry to be a marketer's bill of rights.
Look, I think that that's a very good voice to the conversation. It's a complex topic, so simplifying it down to a bill of rights, I think, is very helpful because, look, if you have all these folks in this room and only a few of them have actually read the K2 intelligence report, I didn't even ask about ubiquity firm decisions. Those pieces are, I think, need to be read by a much broader swath of the folks. And the MediaSmith piece is really simple. If you can't read one page, I know we're on a 140 character limit these days, but if you can't read one page on something this important, I'd be a little surprised.
I mean, to be fair, this is the OMA video crowd, and this was the best opportunity we had to put you on stage. We would love to have had you out on stage at our Reckoning conference, which dived deeply into this. But let's end with a relevant question for this audience, which is one of these transparency issues that's cropping up right now in the video marketplace. We just saw Facebook had to restate their viewable impressions. Michael Roth at Interpublic just this week said he didn't think that was that big a deal. So question for you is, you have two big companies out there, Google and Facebook, that are dominating the digital supply chain now in video. Does there need to be more transparency there? And by that I mean all the data on how you're acquiring audiences from them. And are you concerned about their control of it?
So consolidation in the hands of a few is always an issue, no matter who the organizations are. So that's a concern. So not to be flippant about it, but you know that some of those organizations refer to themselves as the quote-unquote walled gardens. So the song track that was running through my head was, John Mellencamp, When the Walls Come Tumbling Down, right? At the end of the day, if you can't trust the information you're getting, and everybody's saying that their data is what they choose to provide to you, that's back to the hesitation piece, right? Am I going to stand up in front of a chief financial officer and a CEO and whoever else in an organization and say this investment is money well spent when there are those kind of lingering questions, right? I think a lot of people will probably be asking more questions for more information.
Okay, so last question. Is that something that should be regulated, self-regulated, or is that a free marketplace?
So I'm a big fan of self-regulation. I don't think government regulation would actually be, I don't know that it would be helpful here in any way, shape, or form. You have parties who have money, meaning marketers. They have the ability to say, I think we need to change the rules of this game somewhat. And if you don't change the rules of this game, then, to a way that we think is mutually satisfying, then we'll put our money elsewhere, right? I think that problem can be solved, but it takes the desire of people to solve it.
Okay, I think we're cutting into lunchtime, and given your former marketing profession, I know you don't want to deprive people from that. So I want to thank you for being candid and sharing your thoughts with us. Thank you, Tony.
Terrific. That's great. Thank you, Tony. Thanks so much. Thanks, Joe. All right. Opportunities have emerged. And so how should brands approach video syndication in 2016? How are they leveraging paid own and earned media within these social channels? And what third parties are helping them? Here to lead this one, we asked a friend of MediaPost, Fred Schonenberg, the founder of Venture Fuel. So once the panel gets situated, please give him a round of applause, and we'll get started.
Nothing in the world makes you feel shorter than putting your legs up like this. From Kevin Hart.
All right. We just wanted to start off first by just a show of hands in the room to understand who's here. Can we get a hand? How many people are brands direct? How many people work at agencies? And then what about sellers? Great. Okay. So a good mix of folks. Very similarly, this panel has a good mix. What we're really focusing on here is how digital video has moved over to social and that explosion that's there. I started Venture Fuel. We'll give a little brief introduction for each of us about 3 years ago. And what we do is we look for emerging media and new tech platforms. So actually when I started this, video and social was a really new, cool thing, and now it's very mainstream. So it's how quickly everything is happening. But so if each of you guys could just kind of introduce yourselves, where you work, and a little background on what you do, we can start off that way.
Hi, my name is Mike Miko. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Laundry Service, a social media agency handling all aspects of content creation and media buying for brands like Jordan Brand, LG Mobile, Hennessy. We also just recently launched a media company called Cycle, which is a fully distributed media company celebrating all aspects of popular culture, reaching hundreds of millions of people, mainly across social. And through Cycle, we also represent about 1,000 social influencers and 1,500 athletes that also reach the majority of their content views across social.
Great. I'm Ryan Pittelak, co-founder and CEO of Unique Influence. We're a social advertising agency, part of the MDC Media Partners Agency of Networks, with particularly close ties to Assembly. We have offices in New York, LA, and Austin. We have clients such as Zappos, Zynga, 1-800-Flowers, Beachbody, among quite a few others.
Hi, I'm Mariana Rodriguez. I work for an agency called BB Clark & Myler. We're a digital media agency based out of New York and Stamford, Connecticut. And we work with a variety of clients, really helping them navigate the digital and video. Some of our clients include Marriott Hotels, Edgewell Portfolio, which includes brands like Hawaiian Tropic and Chic Hydro, and Aon Insurance, and et cetera.
Cool. Hey, everyone. I'm Dave Roeder. I lead our agency relationship team over at Twitter. Been here for about 4 years, give or take. This is exciting for me to be up here. When I got to Twitter, it was just text. I think Tony said 140 characters before, and that's all it was. So it over the 4 years to see the transformation from text to now live football games and debates has become pretty exciting. So good to be here.
Hey everybody, I'm Andy too, and I run marketing for a company called Defy Media, which is an online video company. We made the video that you saw this morning if you were here from Nair. And some of the brands that we operate are brands like Clever, Smosh, Screen Junkies, Omni, and we build those brands or think about those brands very much like television programming entities. So the way that we build an audience is through the creation of original programming. And we have somewhere in the neighborhood of 80 shows that are on the air every week or every other week, and they're predominantly on digital platform.
Great. We're going to dive into ROI and creative and a few different challenges, but I wanted to make sure you had some concrete examples of actual case studies that had worked. So if Mariana, you could start off, and three of you could kind of talk from an agency background of one specific client example, what worked from a social video standpoint, and then we'll go over to the vendor side for some of your best performances.
Sure. So one of the brands that we've seen success with social video has been Playtex Sport, which is in the femcare category. And over the past several years, we've worked with influencers, both giving them kind of the and being able to have that video live on their channels, but also distribute it and syndicate it through our own, and where we would like to see it and where we know the audience is actively consuming video, has been very successful for us. This past year, we worked with someone, and it was much more of a brand-controlled video that we were able to kind of dictate how it was being produced, and then organized and kind of optimized it for the different channels that we were distributing out for. So we had a long form, short form, subtitles, no subtitles. We considered vertical, knowing that's really important as well. So really making sure that we had that control so that it was syndicated out appropriately across the different channels.
Great. So you probably haven't heard of Beachbody as a brand specifically, but certainly you've heard of P90X, PiO, some of the great at-home workout programs that they have. And the story I'm going to talk about is a new product that they launched. It wasn't long ago, maybe a month ago now, called Country Heat. And so this is a fun, entertaining work-at-home video where you can listen to top charting country artists, and there's a workout routine to each song. So it's really fun, and it was kind of viral in a way. And the thing that was nice about it is we launched it on Facebook. The first week it was pretty straightforward, much like most launches, and it was just kind of standard image product. We got some video that had this really awesome view of people actually performing, and it had this almost like 80s feel to the video, the way that it was cut. and the click-through rate was crazy. So it was about 4 times the benchmark of what we would consider success of a good creative unit. And so we went from something that was like a fairly normal product launch to growing about 400% by week 3. And the thing that's nice about the scale of what we were able to see, while driving ROI, hitting CPA goals, is on Facebook we were able to drive tens of millions of visitors in a weekly time frame, and the ability to be able to do that at such scale for a product launch is fantastic.
Tough to pick one. Literally everything that we do drives ROI through social, or our clients would fire us. And rather than describing a particular one, I would just say that with every client that we have, we're trusted to create really relevant, authentic, premium video content that tells a brand story, and then drive people through a purchase funnel from awareness of a brand or product through consideration and purchase, whether that's in platform or on a website. Social allows us to reach the right people, to retarget those people, to create an environment where they can view videos natively rather than having to click off somewhere or view a pre-roll ad or things that just piss them off. It also allows us to reach people because they said something, or we know they're interested in something, rather than because they're a man or woman of a certain age. And then on the cycle, that's for laundry service. Then on the cycle side, we package up media buys inclusive of guaranteed reach across our social channels, across our talent social channels, inclusive of original content, inclusive of talent fees, all at a single CPM. And we can do that because social allows us to become a media company at scale without needing to carry a legacy publication or a team of 1,000 writers.
Dave, what about you?
Yeah, sure. And here's a PSA for Mike. If you're not following the Cycle account on Twitter, you should be. It's one of the best creative accounts, and the way that they're producing content in the moment, following the moment on Twitter is a great example of social video. When I saw this question, I got a good laugh. I initially read this as like, how do you make your video go viral in syndication? And it's just, I have a 4 and a 6-year-old daughter at home, and every day we make videos and we post them everywhere, and every day they're asking if their videos have gone viral. So it's a constant conversation that we have. This morning my 6-year-old didn't want to go to school, and when I said why, she said, because I can ask Alexa every single thing that I can learn at school, so why do I need to go to school anymore? So it's a very interesting world that we're living in. But anyway, one of the trends that I love right now when I think about the sort of the social buzz and syndication, and I look across like what some of the big brands, some of the studio brands are doing by way of dropping video, by way of dropping trailers and launches on the platform on Twitter. And I think they're doing it because, number one, there's the recency of Twitter, right? When you drop a video on Twitter, you're pretty much there. You know that there's going to be a pretty sizable audience that's going to consume that video within those first few minutes. But Twitter drives news. So I look back about a month ago, Ben Affleck tweeted out a little clip from Justice League, which I don't think is even coming out for a good year. And within minutes, 50,000 plus retweets, millions and millions of views. But I think what was more important was the cycle of news that it generated. So if you now even went to Google and just searched Justice League, the top news result is commentary from Ben Affleck and from other stars in that movie, tweeting out videos, and you're reading articles on Variety, you're seeing articles on CNN. It's making the nightly news shows. So it's sort of like Twitter goes, because of the live and public nature of the platform, the sort of the syndication goes well beyond the walls of digital.
Sure, I was going to talk a little bit more about Nair, but the team this morning did a better job than I ever could talking about that campaign. So one that comes to mind, a month ago this week, we did a program called Smosh Live. And one of our brands, which is one of the biggest comedy brands on YouTube, is called Smosh. They did a live show, very akin to something like SNL. It's an 80-minute show, lived entirely on YouTube. And we didn't have a great expectation for what the live viewing experience from a number standpoint were going to be. Not because we're sandbaggers, we just wanted to make sure, we didn't have a metric to go against it. We shot it from the YouTube space. Even YouTube said, we don't have a great gauge. We have the highest of the high, which is One Direction, if you ever wanted to know, the most popular thing that's ever been shot at a YouTube space. And they've done a lot of other smaller things. So we wanted to create the best 80-minute experience we could. We did that. One of the things that, looking back and in the post since, that I think we capitalized on was this idea that social video, for lack of a better moniker, was really our promotional effort. And we had this thing which was a moment in time, which YouTube isn't typically known as, you got to tune in and watch this thing, that was also going to have a shelf life. And we leveraged, I think, Twitter incredibly well. We were trending on Twitter during the event. We were doing snap-sized pieces from backstage, from some of the other things that were in development, from rehearsals. We did this dance number, which the team hadn't done before. We showed them at practice so that we could eventize this a little bit more. And it's not rocket science. It's stealing from the playbook, I think, of a lot of other folks. But you, especially in the sports arena, and the WWE, somebody that does a remarkable job about this as well, that sure, you can watch it Monday Night Raw, but you have to see the whole drama unfold. And then since then, I think social's been a really compelling piece of continued tune-in. And people see, oh, we did parody commercials, and they only saw the parody commercial because it was in their social feed. Now they plug them back to a 90-minute programming experience. So I think we're trying to think about it more, not necessarily even from a viewing standpoint, but from a marketing standpoint, to get you to something that might be longer form or might be a different experience that's on a different social platform.
That's great. One of the things you hear here is there's so many different ways to tackle social and video in general. How would you advise, or how do you advise your brand from a creative standpoint, knowing that they're used to spending a lot of money creating something very beautiful that's going to be a 30-second spot? We heard in the panel previously that a lot of times that's what brands are using. They're taking their beautiful TV commercial and putting it on YouTube and hoping that it works because they don't have the time or maybe the budget for it. How would you advise brands? We were talking before about shooting vertically and all the different opportunities here for scale from a creative standpoint.
I'll go first because I'm next to you.
Yeah.
Cool. I have a good seat.
That is the best seat.
Yeah. So I think that at a very large scale, there's a need for a lot of brands to recognize that a lot of things that are happening right now are extremely antiquated. I would argue that a 30-second spot in and of itself is very antiquated. The idea of spending a ton of money to produce a commercial in a world where content's shelf life is a couple days. The example I give is Campbell's Soup ran the snowman ad for like 20 years. That would literally last for a day today. Absolutely. Maybe you can get 2 days if you had a bad media plan, but you have to figure out how to create really compelling content, really authentic content that's still very premium and representative of your brand, but to do it at a very, very large scale. And the reality is that it doesn't cost $2 million to create a 30-second piece of video anymore. We produce literally thousands of pieces of video content for all of our clients every month. For our top 2 production clients, we produce over 400 videos per month for each of them. And again, it doesn't cost. I mean, they pay a lot of money, but they don't pay millions of dollars per video. So you have to think about how you can create at a larger scale. You also have to think about, to your point, when someone takes their phone out, which is the way most people are consuming content, what are they looking for? So they went on Twitter, they're probably looking for something noteworthy or newsworthy. If you post your commercial on Twitter and your commercial has nothing to do with what everybody's talking about, you're going to fail. That said, if you have the semblance to talk about what other people are talking about, you're going to see the best performance of any piece of content that you could possibly create. When people go on Instagram, they're looking for a certain experience. When they go on to Snapchat, they're not holding their phone sideways, so don't put a horizontal video on it. So I really think that the challenge, the shift that has to happen is just understanding that social media consumption is driven by humans, not brands. It's not like television where brands essentially pay to underwrite TV. Social media is there because it's there for people to connect with one another, and you can share your own content, other people engage with your content. So brands have to just ask themselves, what are other humans looking for, and how can we create content that adds value to that experience? And when they do that, then it becomes a lot easier and cheaper and faster to create content.
Mariana, what do you think?
I agree that it's pretty antiquated the way we look at video right now, and we look at the 30-second spot and, oh, this horizontal video that's going to run across all our different channels. The biggest part of the conversations that we have with the client is really the working, non-working costs, and how do you balance out being able to produce all this content that is needed and unique for each of these different platforms. And so really coming up with a plan to make sure, A, you're not just putting content out there because you want to be on all the platforms, but finding the right ones that are right for your brand and for your audience, and then catering and how can you adapt that content. We do still get that 30-second TV spot that we're asked to distribute on social. because they want to get the most money out of that spot that they can. But what we're trying to do is kind of take 5 steps back and say, can we be a part of that initial pre-production concepting conversation? How can we get more out of this TV spot if you are going to be producing one, so that it's catered to the audiences online that you want to reach in a meaningful way?
That's great.
Yeah, so you made this point about the 30-second TV spot, and the challenge there is that was not a spot that was designed for social, let alone, let's say, a Snapchat experience. And so trying to turn that into a great Snap ad is going to be a problem. And so as a result, I think that understanding where the audience is, if it's a millennial audience, making sure that you have a video strategy, short, vertical, that's for Snapchat. If you're going after an audience that's potentially a little bit broader, certainly, I mean, Facebook with over 100 million hours of video watched every day, using the different ad units that are there, the vertical video, horizontal, square, all that's very important. Twitter, I think, has done a lot with live lately, and the 98% completion rate of these video ads in the middle of the NFL games, I mean, I think that's pretty spectacular. And so I think there's a lot to be said for what is possible there as well. So people need to think about who is the audience. It needs to start with the filming. You can recut. You can turn these 30-second commercials down to something that's usable, but certainly not ideal.
I'll tell you what's another impressive part about that stat is that it's actually real. And so when you say 98% completion rate, it's because Twitter actually has data on all those people, and it's not because one Twitter user is a Nielsen subscriber and represents 400 million other people arbitrarily. So there's probably a separate conversation about like how these things are being measured, but it's incredible that you can advertise in a quote-unquote traditional way, but now have real data and real insights to drive your investments.
What do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a difference between the last slide from the Nair presentation, which was a little bit about their experience, what they learned, or how they've realized how to embark on branded projects in a new world. There's best practices, and then there's, are you fundamentally in? And some of these questions go on both sides of that. Shooting vertical, that's tactical. But are you in on Snapchat means you have to change the way and the approach that you create content. And so getting away from everybody feeding off of key art or 30-second spots or one shoot in one place at one time, that is a philosophical change. That is a hard drum to beat, but being the champion of that means you can have a tactical conversation. When I see people, not us, not anybody on the stage, just nail a piece of creative, I'm more impressed by those that I can tell they didn't have, maybe they changed the culture, but they didn't sit in a room and try to beg and plead to do vertical. They said, we're gonna do something entirely tooled to succeed on this platform. Of course, you want to hit all the best practices, but are we fundamentally in on investing, on shooting in a different way? And when I just saw one recently that was, has anybody seen the Squatty Potty ad on Facebook? Somebody raised their hand. Okay, what happens in that ad? I'm going to ask you what happened, because I can't talk, it's just too awkward. No, I'm kidding, I won't. Yes, exactly. A unicorn poops out rainbow ice cream onto an ice cream cone, and it's so perfectly tooled for Facebook because it all happens in the first 3 seconds. That visual with mute on is something that you're definitely going to watch more. And they didn't sit around in the room and say, how do we take that TV spot, and how do we do whatever? They were like, we're going to kill it on this platform, whether that came out of budget constraint or knowing who the audience was, whatever I handed to them. They did not sit there in a room and say, how do we make a great commercial?
Dave, what do you think?
I'll take both sides to this. I think, number one, content is still going to win. So this is it's always a tough one, because I think if the Jordan brand or the Beats brand or the Squatty Potty brand puts out a really great piece of content, the length sort of doesn't matter as much. That said, we know our attention spans are next to nothing, right? We talk about this all the time. There was I think it was Microsoft that put out a study that said that our attention span is now at 8 seconds. And you compare that to a goldfish, which is a 9-second attention span. So that's, that you could say that's not good, but Mike and I were talking about this before. The phone, and it's so personal, and it's right in front of our face, that actually 8 seconds, 5 seconds, 3 seconds, that's attention. And that's attention that maybe we have never seen before, right? That's different attention than sitting back in front of your 60-inch TV, where now I'm also looking down at that personal device. So I don't know. I think there's still an incredible amount of work to be done to understand just how important that attention is. And I think Tony said it said it right. You know, I could watch my 6-year-old can consume in just 2 seconds, and she gets the message, versus, you know, somebody else that just can't, that just doesn't consume that way. We talk a lot about, at Twitter, we talk a lot about sweating the assets. And, you know, you have a 30-second spot. How do you take that 30-second spot and then create and do more with it? How do you create GIFs out of a 30-second piece of commercial? One of my most recent examples that I like was, I don't know if anybody saw the Pepsi Antonio Brown, who's one of the star NFL receivers. They ran it across a bunch of platforms, and they just simply, they've got Antonio Brown in the video. They brought him to the front, and he just simply comes out and says, "I'm in this video. It's worth paying attention to." And, you know, first 3 seconds, that gets your attention.
That's great. Your Nielsen this week. And we talked everyone in that organization. And shift those dollars, knowing that as it goes up the organization, and they're certainly changing, and those are two of the more progressive brands too, but how do you switch that conversation, knowing that the ROI that they know and can trust isn't necessarily spitting out, good options for you guys?
Yeah, so I mean, I don't think we've ever viewed it as one or the other. We've never talked about replacing your television dollars with Twitter. To me, the two just work together, right? We talk about Twitter and TV. Something like 50% of our users around the world are watching TV with their devices in hand. And over time, we've partnered with the brands and the agencies to simply prove that when you multiply the effectiveness of Twitter with TV, the ROI goes up, right? The MMM results get better by combining the two. There's absolutely a cross-platform, strategy that makes a lot of sense there. We took it a step further. Just about 6 months ago, we partnered with Canvas, CANVS, which I'm sure a bunch of you are familiar with, and they take it a step further by measuring the emotionality of what you're watching. And it just showed that people that are watching shows that they actually care about, whether it be live sports or something on ABC on Thursday night where they're really emotionally connected to, that the combined results are even that much better. So to me, it's not a question of how do you convince a marketer or an agency to shift out of television. It's sort of how do we combine, how do we leverage Twitter to sort of plan better TV? How do we leverage Twitter to buy together?
Yeah, on our side, the way couple panels about the decline of television, our audience primarily is 13 to 30-year-olds, and put a sweet spot at 13 to 24-year-olds. You want brands that matter. It does not take a lot of questions to figure out that the brands that matter to them from a programming standpoint are not historically are not right now on television. And so I don't mean to say that in a scary way. One thing that we've been helped by is our research efforts that have focused on 13 to 24-year-olds and media consumption habits. We have a report that is called the Acumen Report, and we ask people, young people, about their consumption habits. And net of where they watch video, net of social platforms, number one. Number two, and those are added together, Twitter, Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram. For sure, those are different, but they're all video viewing platforms that are social in nature. YouTube, number two. Number three, Netflix. Number four, what we describe as terrestrial or cable television. That's not swayed in our direction because it's non-biased in the sense that it comes from a third party. And so for advertisers like that, if they really want to hit that audience, I think they understand, great, I can do what I'm doing, but I'll be fourth in line. I can't put ads on Netflix today, so I've got to find other ways into opportunity bucket 2 and bucket 1.
Mariana, just real quick, like with like a Playtex, and obviously not giving any specifics, but that's a conservative brand that needs to report sales lift. I mean, how do you go about making these types of changes? And
so we definitely, just going back to Nielsen for a second, have been hounding them on what the definitions are for ROI and for TV and for print. And we get results back that say males 30-year-old males are reading 14+ magazines and subscribing to 14+ magazines, monthly, which we'd love to understand, where that's coming from. But at the same time, the discussions we have with our client is, okay, we have this data over here, but then we have data like, we look at the Acumen report, we love that report. Really when we're talking about like a Playtech Sport, their audience is 13 to 24-year-olds, and that sweet spot is that 17-year-old. They're on social all day, every day. Their phone is their life. They're not on TV. So we are seeing slowly with just proving out points, and we started a few years ago testing here and there and getting additional budget. And I think it's really testing and learning and optimizing and proving out results. So tying it back to, as social platforms, Twitter and everyone evolves and get more and more mature, there are ties to Nielsen or Millward Brown, or other reputable kind of measurement solutions that help kind of prove that point out to the client that, these things are important and that they are proving out results.
I just want to add to that because I'm sure that not everybody here shares this view. I think, and I've said to all of our clients, this is especially on the cycle side where we describe ourselves as a modern media company, that the money spent in TV for the most part is outrageously a waste, and that there's a gigantic bubble in that space. That doesn't apply to like if you're a giant CPG brand and you sell toothpaste and your consumer is 50 plus and does watch a lot of TV still, and you don't need targeting, totally, it works, the data's there. But if you see across the traditional TV ratings coming down, money spent in TV going up. And for the people that are continuing to watch TV, they're definitely not watching TV when there's a commercial. I would literally ask anyone here, are you watching TV when there's a commercial on, or are you looking at your phone? The most recent study I saw suggested 55% of people are engaged in a second screen completely when there is a commercial on. I personally think that number is much higher, but I'm also a millennial, so I'm biased. But if you look also at the usage rates of TV across different age groups, the younger people get, the less they watch TV. And I think what's going to happen is there's going to be a change in how we define TV. Like this idea that like TV's dying. It's not. What Twitter is pioneering right now, that's going to be TV, right? If you go onto your television and there's a bunch of apps and you get a bunch of content and brands are somehow integrated, you're just going to call that TV, right? Linear. The way part of my neighbors are both of them represent 30,000 viewers. I'm not exaggerating. So when they both they're married and they will be 60 into that TV show, literally. So that's not measurable. And then when they're watching TV and then a commercial comes on, they look at their phones. And so to answer your question directly, the clients that we work with, a lot of these brands spend heavily in television, right? Jordan Brand and Beast, and they do. And for a lot of the reasons that you talked about. But the clients the people we work directly with understand that, acknowledge that. They know they have to have more accountability and more thoughtfulness behind how they reach people. And they are pulling away from TV at a pretty big clip. So I really do believe TV is a bubble in the same way that there was a housing market bubble, 7 years ago, and an internet bubble 16 years ago. There's a ton of money going in and a ton of people coming out.
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of great points here. I think there's a distinction between TV plus social or TV versus social. And the idea that TV ratings are declining and therefore we should shift dollars to social makes sense. But all of the measurement and modeling has been oriented around television. So as a result, it's really hard to make that argument. So what you'll hear from, I think, I don't want to speak for Twitter, but certainly from folks that I've heard at Twitter and also at Facebook and others, is it's really about TV plus social. And then it's about that multicasting behavior. So for example, somebody sitting on the couch, they're probably sitting watching something on social, watching some video, using some TV sync technology to actually be able to target people who might be watching a show that just had a scene happen and then showing them something on their phone. And so, I mean, it's a very powerful connection. And you can create really customized versions of the content based on who that person is as an individual. So maybe tie back to the commercial, but take it a step further, something customized based on who they are. So I think the first step is TV plus social. and then eventually we can get to the point where we're talking about TV versus social.
Yeah, I don't disagree with any of that. I think there's a lot of perspectives that you can take towards it. I certainly don't think that there's going to be this rush where everybody takes dollars completely out of TV and completely into social. There's many other ways to invest in media. And again, I think before any of that could happen, the definition of social versus TV is going to change. Keep in mind, these are all categories that we made up, right? We as marketers. It's not like out of home marketing today. We create these constructs. But I do think that there's a lot of brands that do a great job with TV plus social. There's, I think, a much larger number of brands that invest in TV because it's what they've been doing, and it's what they're comfortable with when their consumer is looking at their phone when their commercial's playing.
Does anyone here not have cable? Yeah, increasingly I'm asking that question in meetings with both brands and agencies, and it's astonishing. You guys should all do it when you start meetings. It's astonishing at how many hands go up. And obviously the younger audience you're in front of, I've now seen 60, 70% of hands go up when you ask that question. So it's just a great way, I think, to kick off a meeting and really get a sense as to what's truly happening.
Yeah, I think why people don't subscribe to cable is another piece, which we won't do a qual study here. That would be very fun. But as we've dug into that, especially for the younger age group, we start to see there's value attribution of all these different sources. It's not because they can't afford it. Sure, that's on the list of reasons that they don't subscribe to cable, but I think our friends in the more traditional media space want to paint a picture that you will age into cable. You will afford cable at some point, and we will welcome them with open arms when the time comes, and I don't buy it. I don't buy it because the audience has told us through a bunch of great, I think, research work that says it's not about how much it costs. It's what's there isn't interesting to me. And even with this study and recut the data for financially independent, I'm going to assume that if you paid for the ticket to come to OMA, you're financially independent enough to potentially afford cable if you wanted to. It's that you don't ascribe value to what's on there. And then number two is it's not for me. So I could afford it. I don't like what's there. Even if I did have it, I don't even watch it anyways. Those are two huge reasons outside of not being able to pay $100+ a month to get cable. And I think that's where you see, we always call the current world we live in the content democracy. If you came up in the content democracy of, I want what I want, when I want to, on the platforms, of course, this all seems stupid now when you look at it now, but how frustrating is it then when you walk into a world where that doesn't exist? And that's what I think a lot of people perceive cable to have, other than stuff that's not necessarily interesting to them.
I think you raise a really good point, and it's part of where I think there's a challenge with marketers for TV. In the content democracy you're talking about, a toothpaste brand does not compete against another toothpaste brand. It competes against the next piece of content in the feeds. I'll endorse Roeder as he endorsed me. His Twitter is also great. Your kids are adorable. If the piece of content from brand A is not cute as Roeder's kids, I'm just continue to scroll, right? Literally, that's it. And so when you look at TV, and when people go onto Twitter, they're just looking for general news and updates. You go onto Instagram, you're looking for pretty photos. A brand can do that. A brand can get the conversation. They can post really content. People on the Warriors game. Is your brand going to create something that's better than Kevin Durant? Because if you are, then you have a very high, it does not matter if your commercial is better than the next competitor's commercial. I'm looking at my phone. And so because people tune into TV usually for a very specific reason, I think this is why Netflix is successful. I want to watch Narcos. I don't want to wait another week to watch Narcos. I'm going to watch it right now. I'm going to do it on my terms. And then when I go to an arena that is more brand friendly, where brands can compete, then it's fair game.
For sure. I mean, and I also think what you're seeing now is brands that are coming to play ball with, big baseball bats instead of those little teeny ones you get at the stadium, and people are starting to pay closer attention. When I look at Dollar Shave Club and all the success that they had, they didn't start from TV. They didn't start from having Unilever or P&G dollars. They made a remarkable video that exploded on YouTube, which if you've never seen, I don't know where you live, but you should check it out. It's so well done, and everything. The title is perfect. The first 10 seconds of that video are perfect. Are our blades good? No, they're effing great. It's like just pulls you into what it is, and they didn't have big dollar shaving budgets that you would think of in that category historically. They did it because they had a better story. They had what they deemed to be a much better product, and they didn't need 5 blades like, you see, you had 1 blade like Uncle Pappy had. So you get all these different aspects of the brand, and of course they grew rapidly, and they actually ended up being, and I think that's very telling for the people that you start with, of the L'Oreals of the world, to say, how long are we willing to wait until somebody does that and exploits that space far better than we are, because we can't figure out our shift based on our bonuses.
Right. I think it's amazing.
Your words, not mine.
I know.
Bonuses when I say
use
it.
those words. Mariana, this kind of plays into something we talked about, which is, Dollar Shave Club did do such a good job on social, and now has migrated into TV. So sort of reversing what we're trying to do with everyone else. But one of the reasons is that sort of, I'll call it bleed. You get so hyper focused in digital and with your video, but it's hard to grow a brand that way because you're also not picking up the other folks. And we mentioned that. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, I would say, yeah, definitely. One of the biggest kind of cons, which is also one of digital's greatest pros, is that targetability and that ability to really hone in on that niche target. You can find exactly the person or that group of people that you want to reach in such a specific manner with social and with digital that scalability becomes a huge issue. And what we're seeing a lot of our clients right now do is kind of take a step back and say, okay, that's really great. And maybe for a direct response brand, that's exactly what you need and what you want, but you're missing out on this entire kind of peripheral group of people that could potentially be your target consumer that you're not aware of yet. So we are seeing, and that's why the scalability concern is something that we talk about with our clients, and is why a Facebook or a Twitter Plus TV is still something that is able to grow a brand and reach, and I think that's what Dollar Shave Club was trying to do there.
Can I ask a question? I know you're mad because I won't shut up right now. So that's a very good point. A couple 100 million people actively on Twitter, a bunch on Instagram and Facebook. What's the scalability concern if you no longer care about targeting? Because if you go to TV, you're saying, I don't care about targeting. So, and you're still going to pay lower costs and you're still going to reach people in an intimate way.
Well, I think programmatic TV, you can care about targeting and you can potentially get as, not as niche specifically as social, but I think that it still allows for a more effective kind of purchasing of that media and reach of that media, when in social you just get, and I think it's something as marketers we need to train ourselves to say, okay, maybe we shouldn't push all the targeting triggers, and we do need to take a step back and say, okay, client, we're able to do this, but maybe this isn't the right thing to do at this point in time.
I mean, I think it depends on the objective. So if you have a campaign that's going after a very targeted group of people, the nice thing about social is you can find those people and very accurately show them the video that you're trying to show. But if you want to get broad reach, like you might with TV or something like that, you can do that too. So the targeting is just flexibility that gives you options.
All right, we've got one more question very quickly, and then we'll turn it to the audience. Looking at this all has happened so quickly, the number of people that are watching on social. Are there any new platforms, emerging platforms out there that you guys are paying attention to that you think are interesting, that maybe your daughters are playing with at this point that the room hasn't heard about yet? When we start at the end and work back.
Sure. Some of the live platforms are really interesting, not because I think there's a massive marketing land grab there at this very moment, as I think sort of initially started by Periscope, and now you see Musical.ly come out, and you see Lively drafting off of Musical.ly, same product, but not oriented towards music. There's for sure a hyper-engaged audience that I'd say is having a lot of fun and using the platform to, not because they are trying to engage with people in benefit from what is great about live, has some element to it that other platforms don't have. And on top of it, you don't have to be a storyteller. I think a lot of people find YouTube to be scary in the demo and Snapchat to be scary in the demo. If I can't make a really cool start to finish story, my life is boring, well, I can just go live and talk to my friends if it starts in that way. So the live stuff is interesting. What it means for marketers, I think it's still very, very early, especially from a media, can I buy and transact media in that environment? But we're paying really close attention to it.
Dave?
Yeah, my kids, I don't think they've discovered anything that I don't know about yet, but it's possible. What astounds me is I think back to Mary Meeker, who put out her annual presentation, and on one of those slides, she coined the idea of real-time live or real live. And at the time, I don't think anybody quite understood what that meant. And here we are 6, 7, 8 months later, and now we're sort of living in that. Like now it's clear what real-time live is, right? It's somebody in the middle of Turkey during something where the country's under turmoil going live and broadcasting out to several million people at once, or it's This happened a couple of weeks ago. It's one of the influencers in the digital world partnering with a brand, and they partnered with Wendy's, and they went into a kitchen, and for 6 minutes they bacon cheeseburgers, and for 6 minutes they had 300,000 people watching. And that's that sort of real-time live world that we live in, right? You've got an influencer that's reaching the audience that Wendy's is looking to reach, and they can captivate your, we talked about attention before, they can captivate your attention for 6 minutes. So that's a trend that I think I'm most excited about.
Rihanna.
Hey, sorry to cut in real quick. We are out of time, so if you could just do real quick answers from here on in, that would be great.
Okay.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
I would say that I agree that live platforms are definitely interesting. I would just add YouNow to that. Gen Z is very into YouNow right now. It actually has a huge user base, and I would look at them. You can purchase and reward the influencers and the people kind of posting on YouNow or live streaming on YouNow. And then I would say messaging apps, chatbots. Kik is one that has a combination of both. It's huge with the Gen Z target as well, and it's one that we're paying close attention to right now.
Twitch for watching people live gaming. I mean, it's pretty incredible.
Agree with everything.
Yeah.
Great. Well, no, thank you, Fred. Thank you, panel. We don't have time for questions, unfortunately. If you do have questions for these guys, please take them outside. That'd be great. I'd like to invite the last session of the day to come up and thank these guys.
Thank you.
That was a great panel. Just another quick reminder as we're setting up for the last panel, please do stick around for lunch, which is sponsored today by Twitter. They'll be releasing brand new research on social video. So they were talking a little bit at the end of the panel about live streaming. Well, live streaming is here, and it's also the subject of our last panel. It will continue to evolve and gain its own following, but could it one day replace broadcast TV in the same way that it's diverted attention from so many other traditional media? Well, here to ask this and other questions, we asked PJ Bednarski, who is the editor of MediaPost Video Daily. So please welcome to the stage PJ and his panel. Give him a second, though. They're almost there.
Is this working?
We have one more person. Yeah, if you sit there, that'll work. Oh, that's not working. You can ask them to turn up. Why don't you sit?
Does it sound?
It's on.
Hey.
Stand.
Good to see you. And in a half an hour, that goes live. So let's do it. Anyhow, hey, I've got a great panel today, and boy, that last panel was really exciting. We're here to talk about live streaming and also just about using the whole digital space and apps and social media in new ways that actually sort of work. I'll go around. Maybe I'll let everybody introduce themselves and start with you, Mario.
Okay, I'll go first. Many people may know me from traditional TV, but I'm really taking new channels into new media and live streaming. So I'm a technology contributor on the Today Show as a regular on the Today Show, talking about technology and how you can use it to advance your life, your goals, your dreams, and your passions. But now what I've done is I've been working over the last year and a half focused specifically on live streaming. It's very interesting how some people maybe seem like live streaming is something that's still like to kind of play with, where I'm seeing it from a completely different perspective, where we're seeing tons of brand integration opportunities, lots of hard and real data and analytics. And you also have things coming up that are happening in New York, like the Live Fronts, which was started by Al Roker, as well as Gary Vaynerchuk, which is basically a live fronts, just like the new fronts and the up fronts. It's now happening for live video. So this is certainly something that's not just in the corner that someone young is playing with. We're talking about grown adults that are actually going to live streaming in place of other content. And we're seeing some amazing possibilities around brand integrations in new ways. So that's what I'm about. And the show that we're launching is a multi-camera, full production show that's going to be a talk show done unlike any other talk show because it's crowd produced. So the crowd will pick the guests, they'll pick the topics, but we integrate them live into the show through a ton of social media. So that's what I'm all about.
Wow. Okay.
Sure, I follow Today Show guy. Come on. My name is Marla Skyko, and I work inside Publicis Media. For those of you who know, it's one of the large holding companies in the advertising space, representing tons of big brands who are interested in learning more about integrating into live and others, or at least we think they should be as they lean forward. I work very closely in the area managing digital and the intersection of digital and multicultural within our organization. And for those of you who aren't as in tune to the multicultural space, in terms of the growth of digital and live viewing, the consumers that lead the way in that would be U.S., African American, Asian, and Hispanic consumers. And it's very interesting to see the type of consumption that happens everywhere digitally, social, video, and particularly as we look at the rise of live streaming.
I'm Don Wilcox, Vice President of Multi-Platform Marketing and Content for PBS. And that's a recent title change for me. We reorged and blended the marketing and digital teams together to create a digital-first marketing organization. And so I now oversee all strategy, marketing strategy, as well as PBS.org, all of its different content verticals, and PBS Digital Studios, which is our original YouTube programming network.
Great. You know, while Mario was talking about that real live, old people are possibly going to get involved in live TV. It makes me think that, Don, you represent a place that really has some of the most adult people there are, PBS. And I wonder, starting with you, how do you think you can use live television or live digital and also various other social platforms and get a pretty hard to get crowd, I would think?
Yeah, so I've been an evangelist for like embracing the multi-platform reality we live in today. And so part of that, it spans distribution, content, and marketing, and that's why Digital Studios was born. And we don't typically, on broadcast, get that millennial slice of the audience. We get early childhood, strong foothold there, older adult demo. We kind of fall off the radar for a few decades. But now on YouTube, we're actually driving 34 million views a month, 18 to 34. Half of those are actually 18 to 24. So we're reaching a new audience. And my mantra is more is more. You have to really think of all of these platforms as new audiences to tap into and not. I've been working in television, I like to say, since the turn of the century. And I've seen a lot of old school TV people fear cannibalization of the linear business. And you just have to believe that it's additive and you're growing your pie by being in all these spaces. So on the live question, we actually have been experimenting at PBS on some live broadcast programming in interesting ways that are pretty unique to us. Like last summer, we were at Monterey Bay and did a live natural history event with our partners at the BBC where we covered the marine mammal and sort of conservation success story there. And it was really fascinating to kind of bring almost a live sports coverage kind of energy to a nature show. And as part of that, we also had a lot of multi-platform activations. So not only was the show going live, but we were periscoping from behind the scenes to give another live perspective. We had one of our YouTube hosts creating original episodes kind of on the fly, putting them out same day. So not quite live, but pretty fast turns. And so we were lighting up all these different screens around this Big Blue Live property, and it was amazing to see the social sentiment was incredibly positive. A lot of people engaged with that brand purely on digital platforms, whether it was only on social or maybe watching the live simul stream or watching the periscopes, and they got satisfying experiences however they came in. And so I'm a big believer in just being okay with maybe you only reach somebody on Facebook, but if you make a great brand impression, that's a win. So we have continued to explore with live. We're doing a lot of simul streams. Last night, Frontline did The Choice, which is every election season, we do a great kind of matchup of the two candidates. And we had that not just on broadcast, it was live streaming on pbs.org, on YouTube, and on Facebook Live. And we had done a Snapchat takeover of our channel leading up to that. So we're trying to,
cool.
use each platform the way it's meant to be used. So with Snapchat, being very intimate and unpolished and more spontaneous and super, super authentic. YouTube is a bit more polished and produced, and there's a whole spectrum there. So it creates a lot more work, but we're really trying to figure out our place in all those platforms.
Marla, what do advertisers want to know about live TV? Going live, or just otherwise using social media? Are they interested in it yet?
Well, I think advertisers are interested in what drives people. So we start with what drives people. And I think the panel before us made really good points in terms of making sure you're authentic to the platform that you're designing for. And if we look at the largest group of people, and what marketers are all obsessed right now is with millennials and how do millennials behave. And if we look at millennials and then we look behind them at Gen Z, which is then millennial on steroid in the way that they behave in some of these areas, your day begins visually. It is creating your own images, sharing them in real time is something, it's just the way you breathe. I mean, we might get up and you text your friend or you text your spouse, good morning. There is none of that. My kids sit down when they wake up and they're eating cereal and you just look at them on their phone. All little faces, they're literally sending snaps, rapid fire. They could snap 100 people by the time they're done pouring the milk into their cereal. So when you think of it that way, this desire for real-time sharing of images and living your world as you create your world, that's how you expect to view the world, and that's the type of instantaneous video that you're hungry for. So I think advertisers need to be interested in leaning in, even though it's a very new marketing space. But if that's how the consumer is living their life and how they're sharing and how their digital day progresses, marketers need to be relevant, and they need to figure out how they're going to live in that space and create value in that space, which involves creating for those spaces and not repurposing. And that's a entirely new way to think about media when it comes to live.
Yeah, and engagement for live is ridiculous, right? I mean, it's way off the charts, right?
Yeah, I mean, the time spent there is enormous. Periscope right now says they have over 110 years of video per day. So, and Periscope didn't even exist, very long ago. So when you look at the growth, the user base is still in the low millions for either Facebook Live or for Periscope, which are the two that lead. But the growth is amazing, the engagement is amazing, and the number of views that are happening already are the reason that we need to start thinking about it and paying attention now.
Yeah.
Yeah, but also like the brand conversions are happening like right in streams right now. So like if you actually have a product placement or product integration, you may have 100 people watching your stream, but if 45 of those people actually take action, that's massive. And then you can repeat that over and over in different ways and have different CTAs that deliver real measurable results. It's incredible how fast you can actually create content, not have to have the level of production and the need for editing and all of those things in order to still be able to make something relevant to the audience.
Now, Mario, you have a show called Never Settle that's going to start when?
It starts in March.
Okay. And we were talking on the phone. You said you expect it to be roughly around 40 minutes live? Is that
Yeah, that's correct.
Isn't that a tough thing to tackle that long?
Well, I think it is for certain people. I think not everyone can do content in live. I think it was awesome hearing what Don was talking about how PBS was out in nature and how live gives you this energy of spontaneity. Live creates this energy that you feel like it's play-by-play calling. And I don't know the last time I've watched something that was as awesome as watching something in nature look like it was feeling like it was play-by-play NFL. And so what live gives you is the ability to be spontaneous. Spontaneous means you can create unskippable viewing. When you have opportunities to create unskippable viewing, that means you can't bypass a moment where there might be some product placement or product integration or something that's happening in a way that's really authentic to the contextual programming that you're making. And so for us, I think it is challenging for people, and I think this is why there's so much education that needs to be done, because I think some people see it as, oh, those are people that's like the Star Wars mom is on Facebook, so how do we even get an ad in that? Versus how do you find strategic publishers that are actually creating live content for the purpose of live? When you do that, you rethink everything about linear, you rethink everything about how do you make this engaging engaging? How do you make it interactive? And how does the brand win without losing the customer by creating something that's inauthentic? And I think you also have to have talent. That the best talent to me are people that actually know how to do play-by-play or radio people. I come from NPR. I come from public radio broadcasting. So coming from radio gives me a bigger advantage than most people because I know how to fill the gaps. I know how to take, when we have our video wall on set that's going to be branded, we can do a live poll in real time on Facebook, have that poll branded. I can throw out a question while I'm interviewing my guest, still be able to hear my social media producer tell me, go to Mary's comment, this is going to set the thing on fire, and be able to still have a conversation and go to Mary's comment, but then see Mary's comment go up with the live poll with the branded advertiser that's sponsoring that live poll.
And Don, you had something to say?
Oh, I was just going to make the point that I think one thing to think about that's very unique to these spaces is the fact that the content is really geared toward conversation, and I think that changes the nature of the impression and the level of engagement because you really are reciprocating, you're having a back and forth, and people feel like they have more of a chance to be heard and they feel a part of something, and that it creates a bit of stickiness. And I think that's a really interesting dynamic we're seeing. I first saw it on our YouTube shows, which are very conversational, and we've got hosts who will dedicate episodes of their shows to talking about the comments on previous episodes. And one example I shared recently was a show called The Art Assignment, where the host received a comment from a user. She responded to that comment. Another user said, well, that was kind of a lazy response. So she then shot another video responding to the comment on her comment. I mean, it's like this deep conversation that keeps going, and they're building not just an audience, but a community. And I think that's true, or whatever, that there is live conversation happening there. And the more the content's geared toward that, I think the more successful.
So, Marla, you were multi-platform before a lot of the platforms even existed. So, I mean, that's pretty impressive. And multicultural, emphasizing that too. What's the special hook you think that there might be for, specific multicultural audiences?
Well, I think so. Multicultural audiences are the first ones to want to have the latest technology, and it is just a native thing that the new iPhone comes out, and immediately I want that iPhone. It's not only a necessity, it's a status symbol, and it's who I am about. It says as much as the shoes that you wear or how you do your hair. It's another thing that is about you, and they're just inherently, it's a very social, they're social groups, whether, it's African American or Hispanic. Socializing is in the nature of everything you do, and you are mobile all the time. So if you're looking at the intersection of socializing and mobile, you're going to find a whole host of activities. And there is more of a tendency to lean in and create. There isn't enough relevant content that's created for these audiences. So then if it's not there, let me do it myself. So you're going to want to be a creator. So if you are yourself a creator and you happen to be younger, I mean, it's just this sweet spot. You yourself you're going to gravitate to these types of either from brands or from publishers or whatever content that you love. You're going to be more likely to want to tune into, and happening live is important because that's sometimes exclusive. You want it first. It's the first time you're going to see that information. You're the first one to get it, and then you get to share it. So being your own producer and being you are your own content creator is a big part of, I would say, for millennials in general, but over half of millennials are multicultural, so it's somewhat one and the same.
It's pretty. It seems to me that the specificity of multicultural audiences is like they were kind of shut out of media before, and now they've got a chance to really do this sort of live one-on-one thing that is kind of different, I think.
Well, that's partly because the opportunities haven't always been there.
Yeah,
and so when that can go across racial, or you can go across economics, socioeconomic status. Absolutely. When you haven't had the tools, the resources, or the access pretty traditionally, and then you finally get that, you start to see how you can be empowered to empower others. And so you see that forming in so many ways, whether you're looking at the political debates or whether you're looking at Twitter, NFL, you're seeing so many people now being able to really control their content and control their language for their community to then build their voice to get it out there.
Yeah.
And you need a smartphone. And it used to be you needed all this equipment. It was expensive. And the bar is now you need a smartphone and you're done. You go live and you produce quality content with that device. It's a really powerful thing.
How do stations feel about what PBS is doing in digital?
Well, I think generally they're happy that we're helping provide platforms at scale to help them, modernize in ways that because we're really a member organization. We're not your typical network, and so it's a member organization of community-based independent stations. Some of these we have, 800-pound gorillas, and we have, little guys with only 8 people total.
Yeah, and they
staff.
freak out when PBS
And so
gets a little
we
too...
provide a lot of solutions for them and bring their branding along and try and let them inject their local content into all those sort of distribution plays, and they, I think, appreciate that and have been very active participants in that. But I think what's really kind of interesting about when I think of local, I think of the Detroit station, and a lot of our member stations actually are also producing stations. So a lot of our content comes from Boston and New York and other big markets. And so Detroit has decided to pursue the book category, and they've been going to different book festivals. And it's really interesting to see because they will wheel in, they were just at the National Book Festival last weekend in DC, and they'll wheel in their big remote production situation, like a platform and multiple cameras and a control space and all this stuff to do the live streaming. And then they'll have another section over here with a camera and a light and a standee for their Facebook Lives. And the Facebook Lives are actually outperforming this big, this whole rigmarole over here on this side. It's just fascinating to see that, they're getting it, and they're kind of hedging their bets a little by doing both, but they're really seeing and realizing, wow, this is really a game changer.
Yeah,
So.
the whole social space has made things a lot rawer, right? I mean, it's simple sort of cells in a way. You think?
I'm sorry.
I mean, simple kind of cells that it doesn't have to, slickly produced doesn't necessarily.
Oh
cut it.
yeah, absolutely, for sure. The production values are vastly different, and are there production values? I don't know. It's so kind of run and gun, but. The thing that's great about it too is that the surgical targeting ability of social and the multitude of niches that are out there let you create very specific content for a very specific audience, and you can find them, engage with them, and then when you've got that level of specificity coupled with the conversational nature of a lot of this stuff, you've really got something potent. So I think, and we've really just begun to scratch the surface. We're looking really hard at we have a really diverse slate of programming, arts, history, nature, science, drama, really kind of unlike any other broadcaster. And so we're starting to think about how do we super serve those niche audiences, the history buffs and the science geeks and the arts aficionados, because rather than always thinking about a big tentpole program needing to reach 15 million people, the cumulative value of satisfied niches is really interesting to me. So that's something we're trying to develop.
What happens when everybody does live? What goes on then? I mean,
When you say when everyone goes live?
Yeah.
Well, I think I think that's happening now to a certain degree, but I think what you're going to do is you're going to get different levels of production quality that's happening. So you have someone that just has a phone, that just wants to be able to talk and get something off their mind. Maybe they're a life coach, maybe they're a chef, and they just put the phone on a little mount and you're in their kitchen. Whereas other people are going to be available, so I can actually run multi-cameras into a TriCaster and then push that to a Facebook live stream. Now all of a sudden I have lower thirds, I have bugs, I have brand sponsorship opportunities inside of that video. I have technology tools that I can now use inside of Facebook. And so now that API is available, you're seeing what normally you would have to have a network to give you the green light for. We went to several networks. I'm on NBC. We pitched our show to network after network after network. Mario, too positive. We love your energy. We love your talent. You're great on the air.
Energy?
Too positive. Not enough of that. Too positive was some of the stuff that we got back, and no one wants to take notes watching TV. 66% of our viewers are female. They're educated. They're entrepreneurial-minded people. They want access to information that's going to empower them and move them forward. We figured that out through getting a market research study done from a third party. When you go through that level of detail, you're going to come out with much higher level quality of content in a live streaming venue versus someone that's really just trying to figure out maybe not necessarily how to make ends meet, but maybe how they're going to talk about their passion or their hobby or their interest, and all they need is a phone and some good lighting to do that. So I think you're going to see a varying degree, but I think what's really interesting, if you're used to wanting to spend money in advertising on television traditionally, and that didn't work well for you, I think looking at people that are seriously publishing for places like Facebook Live or doing, I know Periscope is testing some multi-camera stuff, but it's not available to everybody yet. Those are where the new TV stuff that's higher quality, has that sensibility of integrations and understanding cultural differences and commercialized messages and how to put that into content. That's where that's happening the most.
Marla, I was wondering, who do you think is mostly going to get into live? You think it'll be brands, or you think it'll be publishers, or both, a combination, or what?
It needs to be everybody. This is going to become so much more ubiquitous. It really needs to be everybody. Some of it, from a marketing standpoint, is I do a ton of research. I produce a 30-second television spot, and that whole mindset, and the panel before this talked about that, that's been happening for a really long time. And so when you hear live, that sometimes takes some marketers' heads from, okay, I'm producing this type of television content, and I go through this rigor to get there. How do I take that process and kind of blow it up? Because it's scary to go live, and it's more authentic, and it's not going to look like that beautiful, polished 30-second spot, but it's take yourself out of that mindset. It's not necessarily the counter TV, it's how do I start from scratch to be relevant to an audience that is always connected, is always on, and always has a device in front of them, and is now more and more going to be consuming content in real time. How am I effective? Much the way they had to do when brands got active on any of the social platforms.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. It seems that that established broadcasters, cablecasters, might say, "Geez, I want to go. I mean, I've got a cable network. I've got a station, or a network. Well, why should I do live? Is that you think that that's you worked at Fox? You think that that's a logical objection to perhaps doing live stuff?
I think anybody who doesn't realize the world is changing should retire. I mean, it's the writing is on the wall. The multi-platform world is here, and there are still a few holdouts. But I will say, I see fewer and fewer of them with every passing week. Like it's just the numbers are undeniable. I think that the challenge there is getting the legacy folks to be thinking, in the economics of the web, the nimbleness of the web, the personality, the formats, making it all make sense for that platform, and also making sure you actually have something to say that's appropriate. Because it's sort of like VR. You have to do VR when VR adds to the story. Don't shoot something you can do in 2D, in 3D, just because you want to be in VR. The same holds true. It's, a lot of broadcasters traditionally have, they'll cut down a long form program and think they've got a YouTube show. That it could not be further from the truth. Reach them where they are, talk they want to be spoken to in the formats they like. But I think people increasingly in the traditional broadcasting industry are seeing the upside of that and the kind of the inevitability of that.
It seems to me.
PJs, I'm sorry. I apologize. I have to cut in here. We're actually running out of time, so I want to make sure that the audience has an opportunity to ask a question if they would like to. So just we could have one or two questions if anyone in the audience wants to ask one on your panel. If you can ask another one.
Okay. Well, hey, I know that you're content sponsors.
Yeah, Adidas call me.
Yeah. You collect, right? You collect sneakers. Do you
yeah,
not?
I do. Oh, you've done some homework there. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I am a sneakerhead.
I stopped after that.
Yeah, you stopped after that. Yes, I am a sneakerhead. I just want to point to one question that you brought up earlier that I think is really interesting. I am seeing more brands take ownership into doing some live streaming themselves. Whether they're hiring an influencer and do something on their page or on their channel or a snap swap or something like that, or them actually starting to into the routine of actually creating live content on their actual page. I'm doing something with Capital One at the Kennedy Center. We're going to be doing some red carpet stuff, and we're going to be Facebook Living with people like Mer but it was the brand kind of thought of that idea. So it really is, I'm starting to see not just publishers or content creators, but also brands starting to understand we can create our own event schedule if we use live to our advantage.
And it seems like it could be a money stream for PBS for finding sponsors to live stuff that you can't really do on air, right?
Yeah, I think we are not have the same commercial guidelines in digital that the FCC holds us to on because the core values of organization. So we have a goal mission, but with our digital studio, now we managed to cut a pretty good sponsorship business there to help fund. So we used to be all grant funded, and now we're about half and half.
Yeah, that's good.
But our sponsorships are more akin to what you would hear on NPR. You know, this episode is brought to you such, and I have done a hardcore entertainment not game working at PBS. So it's an interesting thing again to kind of find our place in that world.
Well, I've done something. I've watched Fox, so sorry. Anyway,
PJ, I'm sorry. We're at thank you. Folks, we'll have a lunch sanctation shortly after you gather your food and bring it back up here. You can sit, and there's going to be a presentation by Heather O'Shea, Global Agency, and Nick Child's Creative Officer Initiative, which is very interesting. So, around, gather your lunch there. Just come back in your seats. There's lines on, and we'll. And after lunch, by the way, is of an AR. So stick around that as well. Thanks.